I threw the documents onto the table in front of Deborah Miller. "You're demanding the demolition of a historic landmark that's worth more than the entire HOA budget." A deathly silence fell over the room. Someone swallowed nervously, and Deborah turned pale. I knew their dirty secret, but what happened next, no one saw coming. Let's start from the very beginning. My name is Eric Porter, and I live in a small but prestigious neighborhood in Virginia. The kind of place where people believe that a lawn is a moral compass and the color of your mailbox can ruin your reputation. The streets are well kept, the houses are tidy, and the neighbors are polite. Everything would be fine, if not for the HOA. A local mafia with a bureaucratic face that meddles in every aspect of your private property. They'll ignore a car that parks on the lawn every night or a creepy plastic deer on the Martin's yard, but the moment your fence shows the slightest sign of aging, boom, you're now the enemy of public welfare. I knew something was off when I found an official letter in my mailbox. "Your fence violates the aesthetic standards of our community. You must remove it within 30 days, or a fine will be issued." I read the message 5 times, then looked at my fence. Was it old? Yes. Wooden? Of course. Darkened with time? Well, not charcoal black, but in some places. But ugly? No. I'd lived here for years, and no one had ever complained about my fence. Not once. I even checked our neighborhood's Facebook group, hoping to find some discussions or complaints. Nothing. Well, arguing with the HOA by mail was pointless. They reply as fast as a turtle deciding to relocate. So I went to see them in person. The HOA office was in a small building that looked like an insurance agency from the 80s. Dull gray walls, old furniture, and a smell. A mix of cheap coffee and passive aggression. Deborah Miller, the head of the HOA, greeted me. A woman who seemed to enjoy her power just a little too much. She wore a strict gray suit and had a hairstyle that could best be described as the perfect helmet. Her face showed absolutely no emotion, like she had just learned they ran out of coffee but refused to let it ruin her day. She didn't even offer me a seat. "Your fence is ugly," she announced, as if delivering a death sentence. "We've received several complaints from neighbors. It ruins the appearance of the neighborhood." I blinked. Complaints? What complaints? It bothers the neighbors? Who exactly? "We do not disclose the identities of complainants," she replied curtly. How convenient. "So, what do I do now?" "Replace it, or just remove it. Your property already looks strange." Strange? Strange? I didn't even know what to say. What did she mean by strange? I tried to recall what could possibly be strange about my property. Was my house facing the wrong direction? Were my bushes not geometrically perfect? Did they have an allergy to my lawn? The HOA always found something to nitpick, but this felt different. Why was my fence suddenly a problem? Why now? One thing was certain. I wasn't going to let this slide. But I had no idea this would turn into something much, much bigger. I wasn't about to tear down my fence just like that. My gut told me something was off. The HOA loved nitpicking, but this? No real explanation, no specific complaints. No, there was definitely something going on. I decided to dig deeper. First, I went to City Hall, where they kept land records and all the bureaucratic paperwork that most people find boring, except when it affects your wallet and your principles. I expected to receive a standard property blueprint and be done with it. But when I got the documents and started reading through them, I nearly dropped the folder. My old, ugly fence was part of the house's original structure, built in 1890. 1890. Older than the entire neighborhood itself. And that was just the beginning of the surprises. I decided to dig even further. If the fence was truly part of the original design, there had to be more documents proving its historical significance. So I headed to the archives, where people understand the true value of yellowed, crumbling sheets of paper. The wait was long. The archivist, an elderly man whose glasses seemed to stay on his face purely out of faith, took his time searching through the records. "Not every day someone comes in asking about fence history," he chuckled, handing me a few old folders. "But you came to the right place." I opened one of the folders, and if I had only suspected foul play before, now my jaw literally dropped. This fence wasn't just part of the original property. It had been built by order of the Virginia Historical Society. And here's where things got really interesting. I kept digging and came across its official cultural heritage status. Turns out my entire fence was protected by law. And the funniest part? Not only did the HOA have no legal right to demand its removal, if I had given in and taken it down, I would have been slapped with a fine worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yes, hundreds of thousands. It felt like a damn joke. The HOA had tried to make me tear down a historic landmark, completely unaware that they were setting me up for massive financial trouble. But that wasn't the part that truly worried me. Why were they so desperate to get rid of this fence? I had a feeling I wouldn't like the answer, but I needed to find out. I didn't waste time on formalities. As soon as the HOA's monthly meeting began, I threw open the office door and strode inside with enough force to jolt even those who had been yawning in anticipation of another dull discussion about lawns. The atmosphere was exactly what I expected. A room full of people eager to tell others how to live their lives properly. At the long table sat the board members, with Deborah Miller at the head, her face as unreadable as ever. But this time I wasn't alone. I had documents that could turn their whole game upside down. I walked straight to the table and slammed a thick folder of papers down in front of Deborah, sending a few loose sheets flying. "You're demanding the removal of a historic landmark worth more than your entire HOA budget." Silence. Even the old wall fan seemed to stop humming in shock. Deborah turned pale. Her usual perfectly composed expression faltered for just a moment before she forced her mask of cold control back into place, but her eyes betrayed her. What are you talking about?" Tom Reeves, one of the board members, asked hesitantly, adjusting his glasses and shooting a nervous glance at the documents. I opened the folder and flipped through the pages deliberately, making sure everyone in the room could see. Here. Official archival records. My ugly fence. It's part of the original house structure from 1890. I paused, letting the information sink in. And here, I turned another page, my voice steady, is its official registration as a cultural heritage site. Some board members exchanged looks. Those who had no idea about this seemed genuinely confused, but others looked like they had just been punched in the gut. Furthermore, I continued, watching their reactions closely, if I had torn it down, I would have been fined hundreds of thousands of dollars. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. And then, in that moment, everything clicked. I saw it. Deborah's eyes flicked, quick and subtle, toward one of the board members, Bill Hunter. He sat with his arms crossed, looking anywhere but at me. And then it hit me. I remembered the property maps I had studied at City Hall, behind my fence. There was a small strip of land that no one had accounted for. It wasn't listed as public property. It wasn't private property either. It just existed in a legal gray area. But if my fence was removed, the HOA could declare it community land, and after that, they could quietly sell it, probably to one of their own, for a massively undervalued price. And just like that, their entire shady scheme collapsed in front of me like a house of cards. My blood boiled. They hadn't tried to get rid of my fence because it ruined the neighborhood's aesthetics. They had wanted to clear the land so they could sell it and line their own pockets. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "You tried to scam me." Deborah pressed her lips into a thin line. No one said a word, but in their eyes I saw realization and fear, because now I knew the truth, and I was going to do something about it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Everything was calm, but it was the calm before the storm. I sat down at my laptop and typed up a formal complaint to the Department of Historic Preservation. Attached were all the documents, photos, and archival records proving my fence's historical significance. At the same time, I reached out to Mark Randall, an attorney who knew how to push through bureaucracy and loved a good public scandal. Turns out, he was thrilled about my case. "This is a goldmine for the press," he chuckled. "An HOA forcing the demolition of a historic landmark? They're practically begging to be torn apart." And he was right. The response was immediate. Within 3 days, officials from the department came to inspect the fence and wasted no time issuing a verdict. The HOA must withdraw its demand. The fence is now officially listed as a historic landmark. Demolition or any modifications are prohibited by law. Essentially, I couldn't even repaint it without government approval, but the real fun started shortly after. How the HOA's scheme leaked to the local press is still a mystery to me. Maybe someone on the board turned on them. Maybe my lawyer gave the rumors a little push. But within a week, the headlines were everywhere. HOA caught trying to demolish historic landmark for shady land deal. HOA President Deborah Miller implicated in illegal property scheme. When the residents of our neighborhood found out the truth, they revolted. At an emergency HOA meeting, people were furious. "We trusted you to manage the community, not to scam us. You tried to cheat all of us." The board members grew paler by the minute, and then came the final blow. "Deborah, you need to resign." She didn't argue. She knew the game was over. The next day, she was replaced by a new president, and she was permanently removed from the HOA board. And me? I received an official certificate confirming my fence's historical status. It was now protected by law and had even become a local landmark. Now, when neighbors walk past it, they don't judge it. They admire it. "You were right, Eric," one of the board members, who had originally voted for its removal, told me one day. "Ironically, that ugly fence is now the most valuable thing we have." I just smile, because sometimes what seems worthless turns out to be priceless.